I'm Christian Purslow.
And I'm Henry Winter.
I've run 3 of the country's leading football clubs.
And I've spent the past 40 years knocking on boardroom doors.
I'm going to take you behind the scenes.
And behind the headlines. This is football as you've never seen it before.
Welcome to the Football Boardroom.
So, Christian, we're finally here. After the longest pre-season in history, it's 6 months we've been doing pilots and being prepared for the Football Boardroom.
Yep, it's time to cross the white line, make our debut. And I feel quite nervous, actually.
Well, there's no need to be nervous because there's never been a more important time to focus on the boardroom. I mean, my phone's been going off earlier and earlier every morning like an ACAT battery as we've been flipping messages.
Yeah, I was just looking at literally last few weeks, stories in the boardroom. Amarin Maresca, pot shots at owners, get fired. Glasner, pot shots at owners, keeps his job. Transfer window up and running. Gahey, Semenyo going to Man City. Well, most of football's wondering where's the court case and when's that coming. There's plenty for us to shine a light on.
So let's get cracking.
Good weekend?
Very good weekend, actually. I was at Arsenal, watching Arsenal against Manchester United. And, Christian, you know how much noise there is in the football at the moment. Well, there's always noise in football. You've worked in it long enough and I've covered it long enough. But the sound that we're really hearing at the moment is a bandwagon accelerating. And the bandwagon has Michael Carrick for Manchester United manager. And obviously with those two results, the result against Manchester City and then the result at the weekend in this game against Arsenal, he outwitted Pep, he outwitted Mikel Arteta. He's brought a bit of the sort of the warmth and the identity and the DNA and a bit more tactical nous and suitability back into the Manchester United team since Ruben Amorim. I mean, we've talked about Ruben Amorim many times, sort of swapping messages and how we felt he was ill-suited.
Yeah.
And then Michael Carrick steps in and does really well.
Yep.
So where are we at now? If you are Jim Ratcliffe and Omar Barada and Jason Wilcox, you've been in this position in the boardroom looking at a manager. Should he be caretaker? Should it be long-term? What's your thinking process?
Well, the first thing to say is the stakes are incredibly high here, by which I mean at a purely financial level, money. Ratcliffe's maybe 2 years into his regime. He's bought a minority stake in the club for about £1.25 billion, well over double what Todd Bowley's group paid for Chelsea. For that valuation to be justifiable, in other words, for any prospect for Ratcliffe and his people to make a profit on their investment in Manchester United in the long run, or even to justify the investment to date, two things have to happen now at Manchester United. They have to get back to a world where they are competing every year to win the Premier League and they are going deep in the Champions League. Why is that? Well, it's to do with the financial effects of on-field performance and just how material they are for the first time.
Throw some numbers at me. What are we looking at financially?
Well, for the first time in a long time, Manchester United has the 4th highest turnover in English football. I never thought I would utter that sentence. About £665 million. Arsenal now over 700. Manchester City 3 years have been over 700. Liverpool now touching the £700 million mark. And despite the fact that Manchester United remains the largest team in commercial income, the largest team in matchday income, they are now about £100 million below those 3 key rivals. Why? It's pure maths. Last year, they went to the final of the Europa League. They made about £30 million from that journey. Arsenal went to the semi-final of the Champions League and made £100 million. So there's a 70 difference. And then within the Premier League, Manchester United finished 15th. Arsenal, I think, 2nd. So those 13 places, £3 million a place, £39 million, 39, plus that 70 million. There's your £110 million difference between Arsenal and Man United in one season from on-field performance. So, as I say, the stakes now on this managerial appointment are how does Ratcliffe secure a permanent manager who over, let's say, a reasonable 3-year term gets Manchester United back to those two key outcomes of success in the Premier League and the Champions League, to recover that £100 million of lost revenue that right now puts them in grave danger of being uncompetitive in the crucial market for footballing talent.
We'll have a look at who could be the possible permanent managers. But in terms of the decision they've made at the moment, putting Michael Carrick, obviously a club legend, 5 titles, converted one of the penalties in the Champions League final, absolutely adored by the fans. He actually went and stood with the fans in one game at Turf Moor and started one of the chants. His son's at the academy. He's very embedded in the club emotionally. Is their thinking very straightforward in the short term? Do you think that he is a caretaker?
Look, the caretaker to permanent issue has hung over football for some time. I can't see a scenario here where you mentioned a bandwagon, you mentioned emotion, 2 fantastic wins and performances under Michael since he got the
You're not big on emotion,
job.
though, don't you? Bring it down to money.
I bring it down certainly to rationality, and I do not believe that Jim Radcliffe's people or Jim himself will be tempted into an early conversion of Michael into the permanent role. They simply don't need to do that. Michael, to the end of the season, will have played 17 matches. That's a decent body of work to assess his performance. And why would you make a decision earlier than you need to? So my strong view, I'm quite certain about this, is that the decision to appoint a permanent manager will be made at the end of this season, not during this, however well Michael does in the intervening period. And so that's how I think we should be talking about what it looks like at the end of the season.
That makes sense, and I can understand why they're doing it. And it's interesting, this weekend there are fans' protests planned before the Fulham game, and they are upset as a group of fans, or probably many fans, obviously very upset about the Glazers' ownership over the past 21 years and the way they've run the club, but also with Ratcliffe and Ineos, and the heat has been cranked up a little bit on them. Actually, this protest comes at a time when, probably in the eyes of the fans and many observers, they've made the right decision, and not simply because he's won those 2 games, but Michael Carrick is a calm character. He will guard he will guard Old Trafford for this period. But take me into the boardroom. You've lived in boardrooms, Liverpool, Chelsea and Aston Villa. You've appointed managers. How does it work if you've got Sir Jim Ratcliffe presumably at the head of the table? You might have the Glazers on a screen. You've got Omar Barada, the chief executive, and Jason Wilcox, the technical director.
Right now, I think Omar Barada's job will be to be thinking through different scenarios. And again, I think as we look forward to that moment at the end of the season, that critical moment, as I've said, when the stakes are high and, frankly, Ineos, contractually in charge of football decisions at Manchester United, despite being the minority shareholder to the Glazers, have to get this one right, having, extended Eric Ten Hag, that didn't work out. Having appointed Ruben Amorim, that didn't work out. The next permanent appointment has to be right, given the stakes that I've set out on here. And so I think we can anticipate maybe 3 scenarios. And this is how I'd be thinking about it today if I was Omar. I think on a high case scenario, let's be clear, if Michael wins every game to the end of the season, that's 15 wins from now. That will have been 17 wins, 83 points. That's normally second in the Premier League. 25 wins over a season. I think Alex Ferguson did that 6 times over the history of his phenomenal regime. Michael's getting the job if he wins nearly every game. End of discussion. Your word, the bandwagon would be irresistible, and he will have earned that on merit.
And that's a head decision as much as a heart decision?
It's the easiest decision in the world. Right. He's in the building, hugely popular, and he will have achieved an absolutely spectacular improvement in this team's performance with no change to the personnel. Going the other way, Henry, honest opinion on low case scenario. I think if Manchester United don't make Europe from the position they found themselves in.
Europe or the Champions League?
I think, well, certainly Europe. Actually, the Champions League. I think if they miss the Champions League, I just laid out to you, the Europa League v the Champions League. That's a £70 million
It's
miss.
Champions League or bust for Carrick.
I think if he missed the Champions League, he's not getting the job, and we're into a recruitment process at the end of the season. What's fascinating for me sitting here, and I'd love your view on this, is that middle road scenario. Let's paint a picture where for the rest of the season he does pretty well. They win maybe half the games, a couple of draws, lose 4 or 5 games, some good performances, some bad ones. Bit like Ruben and Eric's tenure. You know, there've been some high points, but some low points. But given this year looks like being a lower points total requirement, and given it looks almost certain 5th place gets the Champions League, let's say they just scrape into the Champions League in the mid-low 60s points total. That's the scenario I think we should think through.
It's as we stand today. What I'm hearing is that the gist of the board's view is that inevitably, like the fans, they're absolutely delighted that he's brought some calm and some composure, that he's not going mad in press conferences, because that is not Michael's style. And it's a welcome antithesis to what went before with Ruben Amorim, who became over-emotional and perceived by some, certainly in the dressing room, as a little bit aloof and detached. And I think there must have been a disappointment in the boardroom over the playing style and obviously the results as well, and his demeanour towards the end of it. So Carrick,
and the attack on the board at the end was basically a fire me note.
Would you have fired him?
Absolutely. At that moment, yeah, I think he didn't. He left the board no choice really at that point. But you know Michael well. In that scenario I've painted, where it's been a decent second half of the season, all those positives you've laid out, is he in the frame at the end of the season?
He's absolutely in the frame. And look, I mean, full transparency, you know, I spent a year with Michael Carrick helping him write his book, got to know him well, and he's a fascinating individual. I mean, this whole image of him as being very calm. I read in one piece that he was slightly drab. I mean, that's just the opposite of the Michael Carrick that the players will know. You saw the way he was celebrating at Arsenal with the individual players, with a player like Cunha, who was on the bench, with Seshko, who was on the bench. These are big-name players who would be expecting to be starting. But they can see the effectiveness of what Carrick has done, playing Bruno Fernandes in his best position, giving Kobbie Mainoo just an absolute new lease of life when everyone thought he was out the building, and his half brother was wearing a T-shirt saying "Free Kobbie Mainoo" under Ruben Amorim.
Okay,
and that's so. You know what I'm like. I always try to play the emotional card, because I think football is so much about emotion as well as your
and
side.
You like,
and
you like the player, and you like the man.
I like the man, and I just think, and having spent time with him, and this is everyone saying, well, should you have a legacy player stepping in? This has been such a debate in football, and it annoys me because it slightly ignores what Barcelona have done. You look at Barcelona, they've always appointed, or frequently appointed,
from
legends from within, whether it was a Cruyff or a Pep or a Xavi, Enrique. Obviously.
I think it's quite an underrated criteria. I'd like to say, quick shout out here. I won't get distracted, but quick shout out. Brentford, when they hired Keith Andrews this season, I didn't read a single positive article about that appointment when it was announced. But Matthew Benham passionately believes on the merits of recruiting from within. They believe they have a very specific culture, a very specific management system, policies and procedures in that building, and somebody who's been there and is comfortable in and around that system of management is more likely to succeed than an outsider coming in. So let's talk about the criteria that I think would be applied by the board as they evaluate their permanent candidate.
You have such a forensic mind. This is peak Purslow.
Well, you've opened with, I think, a criteria. Let's call it fit, cultural fit.
Yeah.
And I think that has 2 components. Fit with knowledge of, familiarity with the culture and DNA of Manchester United. And that's very easy to see the attraction of why that would be an important criteria. But closely related to that fit is also fit with the new management structure at Manchester United, which, for our listeners' benefit, is with Radcliffe and Ineos as the effective decision-maker owner, but with a chief executive in Omar Barada and a sporting director in Jason Wilcox. That's the triangle of power that the new manager will have to work with. So fit is the first criteria. And you tell me the standout candidate for that criteria, because maybe if we match candidates to criteria, we'll get a sense of the runners and riders.
Well, Carrick is the obvious fit for that. And from his early days at West Ham United as an apprentice, sweeping the away dressing room at Upton Park when he saw Manchester United players walk in, and he saw Roy Keane in his blazer and Sir Alex Ferguson walking in, the two of them looking like they absolutely owned the place, and they occasionally did. And he was just absolutely smitten, the authority of it. So Michael has Manchester United absolutely imbued
300 odd
him.
games, won everything.
Yeah, absolutely. He's absolutely embedded there. But coming back to your point about cultural fit, Carrick obviously suits that in terms of the playing style.
They've been there before, by the way, with Ollie.
Well, this is the key thing, and this is a question that a lot of people are throwing almost to use as a stick to beat Carrick's case and to sort of throw some road bumps in front of the bandwagon, in that Ole Gunnar Solskjaer was appointed as a caretaker, did very well as a
13
caretaker.
games, won 11, I think.
Yeah, I can remember talking to you. I was out in Paris when Marcus Rashford scored that late penalty in 2019.
I think it's been slightly harshly characterised as an emotional reaction to a magical moment, a last 16 win in the Champions League to turn around the tie against PSG.
It was a great night. We'll always have Paris.
Yeah, but someone rightly pointed out you'd have to have had a seriously cold heart to not react that way. But I think sitting now, head and heart, you and me, bored, the emotion, do you think that we can look back on his permanent reign as a success?
Well, third, second, change
what it
the
was?
Mood around the place.
Those are good. Those now look like good finishing positions.
They do. And I will flip this back to you.
But by the way, they lost,
the next round.
They got pretty well turned over by Barcelona in the quarterfinal and never went deep in the Champions League again under Ollie. And remember my two key metrics.
Yep.
First or second in the Premier League, this is Manchester United, deep in the Champions League.
Money, money, money.
I don't think on those two key metrics you could say Ole Gunnar's reign was a success.
But I think one thing that, fans have been mentioning this, and I think it's absolutely paramount of importance that has to be mentioned, is that there's a different structure, football structure, which you've just laid out in terms of Ratcliffe, Barada, Wilcox, than Ole Gunnar Solskjaer had, which was basically Ed Woodward and players who he might not have wanted. He apparently wanted to bring Haaland in. He was interested in Declan Rice, and you see how their careers have developed. He was certainly linked with the possibility of wanting those two to come to Manchester United in particular. And he obviously got Ronaldo in, and did that cramp their style? Ronaldo, a magnificent player, and the numbers are always good. Your beloved metrics were good. But was he more about selling shirts, or was it about sort of taking them and developing the team?
That's a very interesting question.
And of course, he had Pogba as well. So I think when everyone's making this comparison between, it'll just be another Ollie, actually, it's a different structure that this caretaker, in inverted commas, is walking
Well, I
into.
like the fact that you are accepting that the management structure is now a key success factor in any well-run club, and I'm saying that on that first criteria, let's summarise: fit with the management structure and the DNA. Michael, now in post as caretaker, is absolutely the go-to candidate to tick that box. Let's talk about some other criteria that get talked about a lot, actually, and maybe more in the context of Man United than anybody else. Playing style. This will be on the checklist when Wilcox is presenting candidates to Ratcliffe and Barada.
Don't you think it's important? Don't you think a club's DNA is important? You worked at Liverpool. There was a DNA there.
DNA, culture, history, familiarity, playing style is part of that. I turn it back to you. If Manchester United decide that, flying wingers, attacking football from Georgie Best, Andrei Kanchelskis, Ryan Giggs type football, turning round, Fergie time winners, all that, we all associate with the glory years, who'd be in the frame and what are the issues with playing style?
One very obvious candidate, Andoni Areola. I just think the way that he plays, obviously you will look as a boardroom habitué at the way that he develops players and the good recruitment and how Bournemouth...
Isn't he just the latest Ruben Amorim? He's just the latest hot property.
Possibly, but I think he would come in and he wouldn't impose an alien playing style, i.e. 3-4-2-1.
Well, that's interesting. So let's come back to our boardroom. We're in May. And playing style gets put as a relevant criteria. Would Amorim be seen as a cautionary tale on getting the playing style wrong?
Definitely.
So does that mean they're likely to bounce to somebody where they feel the playing style will be more attractive?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's another element on that is that, and the reason why they haven't acted to get a permanent at the moment is that, and this was something that Amorim said, is that it was a bit difficult for him coming in mid-season. I think if you're going to get a new man in, it has to be someone who comes in the summer.
Yeah.
Coming back to Iraola.
I want to talk about that.
Attacks. Iraola attacks. You look at that team, they go again and again and again. Even when they've had a bad run of games, you just know. I will watch Bournemouth games on the television because I know I'm going to get a good game.
I agree with
you. And
you.
you're going to say, they've sold Semenyo and they keep attacking.
I agree with you. Some might say it's reckless attacking football because they're a 3-2 sort of team, aren't they?
Reckless. You call it reckless. I would call it entertaining.
Okay.
I would look at it from the fans' perspective. If I'm going into their stadium, Vitality, aptly named, I want to be entertained. They're getting fantastic entertainment.
Okay, well, I'm happy to accept that he would be very high up any list this summer because he's out of contract, and if playing style, attacking football, he's definitely on that list.
Would you look at a personality? Would you think, has he got the personality to take that step up? Because Amorim ultimately didn't.
Well,
Thomas Frank, we can argue it's a step up and it's maybe a little bit too much
Good
for
question.
him.
That
Could
leads
Iraola do that?
That leads to my third criteria. Okay, so DNA, familiarity with Manchester United, happy working in the regime, 1. Playing style, 2. Your question on Iraola leads me straight into the third criteria that will be on any boardroom presentation by any sporting director to his owner and chief executive, and that is track record.
Which means?
It means two things closely related. It means, and this is as true in the business world as it is in the sporting world. As you know, I come from the business world originally. Relevant and recent experience, meaning in football terms, in the two key competitions that we identified right at the start today as being the metrics of success: Premier League success, league football in other words, Champions League success, European football, cup football. So a demonstrable track record in those two competitions is what I would mean. And so not just years on the clock experience, but successful years on the clock. And that means ultimately winning. To flavour it, Pep Guardiola
He's not going to Manchester United.
He's won 15 league titles or Champions Leagues. Carlo Ancelotti's won 11. Luis Enrique's won 6. Zinedine Zidane's even won 5. Jose Mourinho, 11. Those are demonstrable track record type candidates, and I can't help but notice that some of those names, certainly Ancelotti and Thomas Tuchel, who's got 4 on that metric, by the way, are out of contract at the World Cup this summer. So track record will be in that room as and I would argue on that metric, and maybe this is my point, Henry, that it's really difficult to find my 3 criteria in one candidate. I mean, you tell me. I mean, they have been there.
Yeah, I mean, I love the big beasts. They're great for headlines and they have this, as you say, an incredible track record. But look at Manchester United's recent history, certainly in the post-Ferguson era. Jose Mourinho, fabulous track record, battle-hardened, Premier League ready, knew everything about opposition, knew everything about the Premier League. And okay, he got a European trophy, a League Cup, I think a Community Shield as well. But it didn't necessarily end that well. Van Gaal, I mean, I was there in Vienna in 95 when he won.
What
with
are people
Ajax.
in Man United saying about I mean, you've mentioned Jose. I mean that
you love Jose, so you'll back him.
And let me just say why. I say why because actually I think this is a really interesting comparison. You know, when I worked at Chelsea, the three criteria I've set out as what I expect to be on the table in front of Jim Radcliffe in May. In Chelsea, under Roman Abramovich, there's one criteria: winning, i.e. track record. He's not worried about whether the person, has a deep knowledge of Chelsea's history and knowledge or DNA.
Playing style? Quite like to attack,
and by the way, the
didn't
management structure is you do what you're told and you win or you're out. So there's none of that stuff. And playing style, yes, but win. Look at the names: Mourinho, Ancelotti, Conte. So he's shopping at Harrods.
Yeah.
Absolute clarity on his business strategy and football strategy. Track record, I want winners. I can tell you, if I had been second in a commercial outcome, I'm out the door. The whole culture of the place was win. And by the way, he did. Under his period of ownership, they won more trophies than anybody.
How does that relate to you in terms of you have to win, otherwise you're out the door?
He never had to utter a word. He famously never gave an interview. He's a very quiet and private man. Everybody in that football club, from Cobham to Stamford Bridge, knew that was the metric, because actions speak louder than words. People who came second lost their job. Some people who won lost their job. So that is a fascinating comparison to Manchester United this summer, where I think we both feel these other two criteria will be relevant. But so yes, and Jose epitomised. He had won a Champions League with Porto. So despite being young, he was the special one. He'd won a Champions League at a young age with a club that wasn't established as a serial Champions League winner. That would have attracted Roman's interest. So,
but the point I'm making is that big beasts don't necessarily.
But is Jose a success at Manchester United? I can't. I mean, I've heard both cases.
Yeah, both cases. I'm just sort of trying to say that actually, is there an ideal candidate?
I doubt that the so-called big beasts you've labelled will score highly on the criteria of working with your Wilcoxes and your Baradas in a seamless way, compared to, for example, the way Michael will, or maybe even a young and up-and-coming head coach like an Iraola would. That's intriguing, isn't it? And so then we're getting into a situation where there are, to use the business word, trade-offs between these candidates.
It's interesting, in 2015, when they did this questionnaire with Michael Carrick as he was considering going into coaching, they actually looked at, the conclusion was that he would make a good coach, he would make a good manager because of that collaborative element, because he could coach, he could train, he did it with warmth, but he did it in a very sort of good communicative way, and with a sort of, the collaborative is very much, and I think that's what Manchester United need. Of the three, who's making the decision?
Well, I think they'll all have a role to play. Let me just throw in two other factors into the criteria before we talk about the decision makers themselves. One that I think jumps off the page when we
money
look at
again.
Money.
It always comes back to money with you. Money, power,
well, let me
politics.
Let me turn it round. You've been much closer to this than me. You talk to people in and around the game. What's the reputation of the regime at Manchester United for spending money in recent times?
They haven't spent it well, and they still have a stigma attached to them because of the way they laid off so many people.
Okay. Yes, you mean non-footballing people.
Non-football people, and then you go and have this huge compensation element. I mean, how many jobs could that have saved if they'd actually made the right decisions? Okay. Anyway, take me back to money.
Well, okay. So my point is this one, that when we look at those three criteria and we look at those profile candidates, I think it's very, very clear that there will be a wide range in salary, cost and requirements associated with those different types of candidates. Michael, as we've said, as let's call him the continuity candidate, the candidate who most fits with the culture of the club, playing style, and happens to be in post. Michael's last full employment was at Middlesbrough, and did very well initially. Middlesbrough, a club perennially challenging to be promoted, a very, very experienced ownership group, well-run, very well-run championship
You like Gibson,
club.
Don't you?
I like Gibson, I like the club, and it looks like, touch wood, this season they're right in the frame. But it didn't happen for Michael.
We lost some important players at key moments.
Also
Morgan
true.
Rogers.
Also true.
Anyway.
But here's
carry on.
I'm making a basic money point.
Yeah.
Michael's salary in the Championship as an up-and-coming Championship manager would have been somewhere in the high hundreds of thousands. I'm going to guess £700,000 to £800,000, maybe with a big bonus for promotion to the Premier League, £500,000, or maybe double your salary. So maybe £1 to £1.5 million in a brilliant year, but a salary of £800,000. And Michael's been publicly linked with other jobs in the Championship since he lost his job at Middlesbrough. I think he was in the frame at Southampton. These jobs are £700,000, £800,000 jobs. And he was out of work, and he gets the call to be the caretaker manager of Man United. I don't know. I'd love you to take a guess, but Michael, will you look after the club for the rest of the season? What are you going to pay me? Well,
I bet that wasn't his first question.
I think Michael would have done it for nothing. Okay,
possibly, yeah.
He's
got that emotional connection.
He's Man U through and
Yeah,
through. I'm
his son's
exaggerating,
there.
but
Yeah,
I
no,
don't
you're
think
right.
I agree with you. It wouldn't have been about the money. Now, if you're Barada and Wilcox, how do you handle that? Do you exploit that? No, that's unreasonable. But equally, if you made me absolutely guess, I don't know, maybe £1.5 million salary equivalent, kind of what you got at Middlesbrough in a promotion year, twice what you were getting at Middlesbrough for the rest of the season. And Michael, you're going to be in the frame for, the full-time job if it goes well. Oh, and by the way, I would think a very good bonus for qualification for Europe.
So what's the average of the Premier League on? Because we always, as readers and journalists, we hear these
Well,
figures.
much more than that. Much more than that. I think, top
end Pep. What's Pep on?
Over £20 million pounds a year. And I think probably nearer £25 million. I know you're grinning, and I know we throw, for our listeners' benefit, I'm sorry if we throw these numbers around like Monopoly. But you asked me the question. I think the range is very top end. We're in the 20s for Pep.
Who's next? Unai?
And Jurgen before he left would have been touching 20. Unai won't be far off that now. And at the low end, even these days, you're talking the low end of the Premier League. I mean. Managers coming out of the Championship probably take a year or two to get reset, but into the kind of 4-5 range. So Michael right now will be very modestly paid to be a caretaker relative to, for example, what Ruben Amorim would have been paid for the full-time job, which I think would have been £6 or £7 million all day. Now we come through to the summer. The big beasts you've talked about. Any one of those names, Tuchel, Ancelotti, even Pochettino, who doesn't tick the trophy-winning box, but is widely considered to be a big beast. He did win a league title in France, so he's got one. And he went to a Champions League final with Spurs too.
And the media love him.
And he's got years on the clock of Premier League and League football. So he's a hybrid big beast.
Got to a Champions League final.
That's what I'm saying. So, but these guys... Any of those guys to take the Man United job will be in the tens, not in the singles. Even if Michael finishes the season very well, is a shoo-in, has a bit more leverage for the job because your bandwagon has become a double bandwagon. Yeah. Literally, they're outside Old Trafford. Give Michael the job. Give Michael the job. And that changes his leverage a bit with the board. I'm guessing it might jump up from the 1.5 to maybe that 4 or 5, but it isn't going to 7 and it isn't going to 10. Maybe I would be looking at big bonuses for Champions League, big bonuses for winning titles, but Michael will go on a salary journey.
So how do you do it? What is the timing? Because you are not going to get hold of these big beasts until the middle of July. And where does that leave pre-season and transfers?
I think that this is probably the overarching criteria that will trump money and profile, which is that, you tell me, but there's meaningful work to be done on squad this summer.
Loans.
Yeah.
They've got to sort out Rashford's future, Sancho's future,
correct.
Onana's future.
Casemiro's leaving. I saw that announcement.
Doesn't the work start now?
The work should start now, and having a manager certainly in place, let's say, as soon as this season ends, to be able to plan a summer of ins and outs.
If you are summoning your big beasts out of the jungle, how can they, if they're heading towards the World Cup?
Yeah, well, in my opinion, that rules out the big beasts.
Right. You think it does?
I think it's a sufficiently significant issue for the board that they will all agree on, that the summer is going to be yet again potentially transformative. It's going to be outs and ins and callbacks, and leaving that to, let's say a big beast takes a team to, World Cup final, July 18, first meeting July 19 in Manchester, late July.
Jet lagged,
week from the season, missed out the whole of planning and some. I think it rules those candidates out.
Interesting.
So my honest view is that a candidate available to start work at the end of this season is not just nice to have, it's must have.
So this is effectively going to rule out some of your track record.
It is.
So you're sitting there, you are Jim Ratcliffe. What decision are you making?
Well, I think it's going to be an interesting board meeting. I think we're talking last week of the season, first week post-season. Wilcox, Barada, Ratcliffe in the room, maybe a few others, but they're the three key players here. It's Wilcox meeting. So in the way this typically works is the sporting director will present detailed profile information on the shortlist of candidates. Some of the criteria we've talked about today.
Go on, I'm pushing you. Who's on your shortlist?
Well, I think for sure Michael is the incumbent, and we're in the Champions League, so we're having a meeting. We maybe have free agents such as Iraola, maybe Oliver Glasner, who's coming out of Palace, out of contract this summer, maybe Marco Silva.
You wouldn't, as a board member, have issues with the fact that has had a couple of pops at the board? Or is that all fair in love and war and previous
I think
clubs?
that comes under our criteria of fit.
Okay.
But in terms of big beasts with track records, the standout names that have been bandied around, all of those who are coming out of the World Cup, I think would be ruled out, other than in an early departure on timing grounds alone.
As Zidane and Luis Enrique?
Yeah, they're two that I think would be under consideration. So now let's be Jason Wilcox. I think a couple of interesting points that we should bear in mind. The problem with these big beasts is if you're Jason Wilcox and you've already had this, really awful end game with Amorim where he's more or less done a it's me or him, I can't see Jason Wilcox in that board meeting pushing hard for somebody where he knows there's a damn good chance that 1 month into the job, that manager's going to be saying to Jim Ratcliffe, I need my own sporting director. I can't work with this guy. So
there's a self-preservation element.
Well, that's the politics aspect of football.
Yeah.
Self-preservation would be a natural inclination for him to perhaps push somebody who is a continuity candidate, or a candidate maybe like Maresca, who is very well known to Omar and Jason for all his years at Manchester City. Not a name I've been reading, but knew them very well. I think when Jason was at the academy at Manchester City, Maresca was running the 21s.
Yeah, I went and watched one of Jason's under-18 training sessions.
He's a name not to be ignored.
I will be surprised.
Okay, me too. But I make my point. He works well with Jason.
Yeah, okay, it's interesting.
And a Tuchel who's going to want you out the door might not.
Yeah.
And now let's be Omar. The chief executive. His role in this meeting fundamentally is about budget. It's about money. And I would just say, and I know
he pushed for Amorim, didn't he?
I know Omar well. He's a rational guy. He's not a table thumping sort of guy. But as you say, Henry, he chose to be very publicly associated with the appointment of Amorim. And for our listeners' benefit, they took Amorim out of Sporting Lisbon for £10 million a year. They paid him £7 million, and they've just fired him and his entourage for another £10 million. That was an extremely expensive mistake. So do you really think sitting in that boardroom with Jim Ratcliffe at the top of the table when it comes to Omar, Jason's made his presentation, Omar, is he going to be pushing, a £15 million big beast, or is he going to be tempted towards...
So come on, I'm going to push you now. It comes down to Ratcliffe. Who's Ratcliffe choosing?
Well, for lots of reasons, and I think you can sense... the culture fit, the pricing, the crucial issue of being in the building at the end of this season, to be around to actually get ahead of the curve in terms of the transfer window, the outs and the ins. I think if Manchester United are in the Champions League, Manchester United will appoint Michael Carrick.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Just quickly, as the transfer window is still open, and this is a club that is dear to your heart, Aston Villa, obviously with probably more than Champions League aspirations as we sit here and talk and look at the Premier League table. You know, they are very much in the title race. And are their title ambitions strengthened by Unai's work in the transfer window with two players, Tammy Abraham and Douglas Luiz, who you know?
Yeah, Tammy was my first signing at Aston Villa on my first day in post, September the 1st, 2018, where I brought him from Chelsea on loan, and he had a fantastic season in the Championship. I think it's great to see him back.
24 goals or something in 40 odd games. Fantastic.
You know, Danny Ings left, John Duran left. You know, there's been no cover at 9 for Ollie. I think Tammy's a very imaginative signing, and I hope that works great.
Sorry, Ollie, what does it do to Ollie, his mentality, if he's got that pressure, extra pressure? Because he's a slightly introverted, very interesting guy, but slightly introverted. But
we'll see how that happens. But
okay.
I think from Unai's perspective and from a fan's perspective, everyone will be pleased that they've got proper cover at 9, because Ollie, they would be very exposed with a long-term injury to Ollie Watkins. And then, as you say, Dougie Luiz coming back. He was in my second year. We took him out of Manchester City for £15 million. He was a 20-year-old. He was captain of Brazil under-21s. And he went on to be a really good player for Aston Villa.
And he's what they need, because they've had bad injuries.
By the way, let me say, of all the players that improved dramatically under Unai's coaching, just go back and look at the tapes. When Unai arrived, probably the player who most quickly went from being slightly in the doldrums to being outstanding in that was my last year at the club. Luis was that player, so a player who really performed under Unai. He'll be thrilled to have him back. 2 terrible injury bits of news. John McGinn out for weeks, and now Tielemans out for weeks. Needed cover. Again, really good to go to somebody who knows the place, knows the fans. Villa's in his heart. Very excited, and I think Villa have got a fantastic shot at the title.
You do?
I can't believe I don't hear that more. What are they, 4 points behind? I think Villa have won something like 16 out of 18 games. Their form is not Champions League form, it's title-winning form, so I think they're well in it.
Can you imagine Unai pipping Arsenal to the title? Wow.
Yeah, he'd like that.
That would cause a meltdown in Islington. Christian, that was fascinating as always. Thank you for allowing me into the boardroom and giving me the boardroom perspective and
You're
the
always
mindset.
welcome, mate.
I know the rooms are full of spreadsheets.
You need a tie next time you come, mate.
I will come with a tie next time. You're very casual, but this is
I'm joking.
This is the American owner's reflection. So that's it for this week. Really enjoyed the chat, Christian.
The Football Boardroom's available in all the usual places. See the show description, and see you next week.
See you next week.